Good morning, dolls, and welcome to Little Gretchen's workshop. So today I'm making a cabinet. Now this is definitely not what I would call a tutorial, but I am going to give you my cut dimensions that I use to make the cabinet. Now that's a sketch in the background, but those are the measurements for the cabinet. But basically I started with a rectangle, just a square wooden box. Okay, so I'm just going over, just letting you see how I assembled the pieces after they were cut. A couple of the shelves were short, so I had to do some shimming and trimming. And I also cut the doors. I played around with it and actually put some painter's tape on it to see if I'd actually cut the doors to the right dimensions, and they kind of were, kind of weren't. So I knew I had some extra work to do on them. But I played around with the shelf pieces for a while, trying to decide how close I wanted them to be based on the items I want to put into the cabinet. So you definitely can put your shelves at whatever height you like based on what you're building the cabinet for. Now I knew I would want to put some jars and some canned goods and possibly some plates in here. So I used my little Lego pieces that were around the size of the items that I wanted to use on that particular shelf. And also the Legos are really great for making sure things are square. And I kept on what I do, try fitting them, not necessarily dry fitting them, but just trying to see how close I would need to get them. And there I had applied the glue because I knew I was set with that particular shelf. Definitely had to hold it until the glue caught. So you're just kind of going to do it based on what you want and what your imagination is for your particular cabinet. Make sure you clean up the glue to make sure it's not oozing out the back. Now, as I allowed that to dry, I kept playing around with the doors to kind of determine how I will make them close. And so I went on to the bottom because I knew I wanted a lower area. I wanted to have a lower shelf to like fold linens and things. And I actually would like to have a drawer at the bottom. So I knew the size that I wanted that to be. So I went ahead and glued that portion in, actually using the Lego technique as well. And as I held it, the glue began to set, and I knew that it would be the perfect size for the drawer I was thinking of. So I decided to see how the shape or the general structure would fit in the area of the pantry that I wanted, that I was making it for. And I feel like it fits good. The way the doors open out is good. I'm definitely going to make them where they'll close, but I said I would go on and continue on with the shapes of my shelves. So I did have some wooden blocks to help me with that next shelf. So I would make sure that they were spaced evenly and square as well. Still playing around with those doors, trying to figure out how I will make them lay flush and straight. So I started to play around a little bit with the shape of the drawer and the sizing of the drawer. I knew that I would have to measure the drawer front to be a certain length. So that's what I'm doing in this picture. And basically when you're making a drawer, you're making a small box. So as I decided for that shelf, I went ahead and prepared the glue because I decided that that height was good for the items for that particular shelf. So I went ahead and glued it and blocked them in, and I cleaned up the glue under the bottom of the shelf. And you want to do that as much as possible so that it won't show after you finish your item, because if you don't clean up the glue, if you stain your item, the glue is really going to make your stain look bad. The stain will not take on top of the wood glue. So in this instance, I was making that small box that's going to create my lower drawer. I had cut the pieces to be a little bit thinner than that opening that I had made at the bottom. And I had to cut the short sides to make sure that they would match the same length. Now, I didn't give the dimensions for the drawers because you're going to have to measure the inside of whatever space that you have for your drawer. So that's not something I would want to give the dimensions for because it's going to be specific to whatever cabinet you make in your drawer space. But the basic design is just a little square box, a bottom, two long sides, and two short sides. And they should all be the same height. And you see, again, I'm using my little Lego blocks to keep everything stabilized as the glue set up. And don't be afraid when you're working on your project. You know, if you cut it a little bit short, you may have to cut it again. No, you don't want to waste wood. But as you're learning how to build furniture, you'll have times of trial and error. But don't give up and don't be afraid to make mistakes because making the mistakes is how we learn. Okay, so now I'm adding the other side of my little box that will become my drawer and just allowing it to sit. And I'm definitely going to have to do some sanding to make sure that it fits and slides in and out of the drawer space smoothly. But while that's drying, I decided to start to add the trim to the door. So the trim around the edges of the door is just really thin coffee stir sticks. And I decided to add it to the entire perimeter of the cabinet, very similar to how I did one of the beds in my Beds from Scrap video. Now, if you haven't seen that video already, definitely check it out so you'll know what I mean. So I am marking to show where I'm going to cut the coffee stir sticks, but they're really great in squaring things off and trimming off possibly rougher cuts. If sometime you don't get things exactly as smooth as you want, the coffee stir sticks camouflage some of the errors in my cutting. Now all of my things are cut from hand. I'm not cutting anything from a machine. I'm actually just using my Swan Morton blade, my little saw blade, and actually some electrical scissors. So yeah, sometimes it's not always that perfect, but the coffee stir sticks help me to straighten that out a little bit. And I do clamp them down while they're drying and constantly fitting to make sure that they still fit into the area that I want the door. Now you see my drawer is dry, so I'm trying it in that space to see how it fits. I'm moving around kind of fast, but you see how it looks. I'm trying to slide it out so you can see. But it's working pretty well. I may need to sand it a little just to make sure it's smooth. I put the front on it, but you can continue to sand to make sure it's smooth. And I put a little edge on it, kind of beveled the side to make it a little bit more decorative. So there, I'm just checking the fit again. And you're going to have to check and try until you make sure it works like you want it to, because you wouldn't want the drawer to stick. So in this portion, I'm adding an extra layer for a lip to be above that bottom shelf, so I'll have somewhere to put my hinge. And I'm constantly checking the drawer to make sure it still fits in my space to know whether I'll need to trim it or sand it more. So I have one door that's been trimmed and then one that hasn't, but again, still checking it for size. Okay, so as I move along, I go on and continue the trim around the edge of the door, the same as I did the first one. So to be quite honest, as far as the design for the cabinet, I didn't have a full concept of how I wanted to decorate it. I just knew I needed two doors, I wanted a shelf and a drawer, but hadn't really considered my decorative options. So that's what I'm doing right here, trying to consider how I could decorate it. So in the meantime, I went on and sanded the door some more to work on that fit. I did want to make sure there was a little lip around the top of the cabinet because I definitely want to put pots and bowls on the top. So that's what I'm looking at this point right here. Okay, so after pondering that, I said, let me do the legs. Now, the legs are the same as how I did the ones on the bed, so I'm not going to go into big detail about them. So I began to round off the sides to the doors because that makes it easier to open and close them. So you want to round off the side that you're going to put the pin hinge on so that it'll be a smooth transition as it opens and closes. So there are those legs, and as I mentioned, I didn't go into a lot of detail of how I made them, but I'm going to show you how I put them on. But they were just the wooden blocks split in four, and I just carved out a little bit at the tip. So I'm going on and just adding the 4 blocks, and I lined up those sticks at the bottom to kind of just give me a guide so I knew where I wanted to sit them because I wanted it to be balanced well because I don't want my cabinet toppling over. So make sure you add a generous amount of glue, but not so much that it gushes out and looks messy. Okay? And then clean up after you're done to remove as much as you can. So here's the fun part. I really like to add the hinges. And as I mentioned, I'm using pin hinges. So I'm just making sure again that everything fits nicely. And I'm looking at the side. So you make sure you put your mark and your pin hinge on the rounded side of your door. Now I had previously sanded it round. See how it's rounded right there? So that's the side you're going to put your mark for your pin hinge. And you see I'm marking it there. So that's where I'm going to drill. So I'm going to make the drill at both ends of the door, and I also have to make holes in both of the lips on the edge of the cabinet, if that makes any sense. And be really careful. You know, this is I think it's a safe way to drill because you know you're turning it yourself, so it's not a power drill. And you see right there where I'm pointing, that's where I'm going to put my other mark for my pencil, where I'm going to drill it to make room or allowance for the pin. Okay, now a couple different things you can use as pins. I actually have used really small paper clips. I do have some brass pins. You can use dressmaking pins, or you know, some people call them straight pins. Lots of different things can be used as a hinge, so don't be hindered if you don't have anything special. Some straight pins from a sewing basket or a pin cushion would work very well. You just cut the tip, make sure that the hole you drill is big enough for, you know, whatever the size of your pin is. And so make sure you use the right size drill bit because most of the pin drill sets have multiple sizes, so you shouldn't have a problem getting one that will fit whatever you have to use. And then when you get it all, both of the holes ready, you line your pin up and you push it into the hole. Now take your time when you're doing this. This is not something you rush through. And you see you have to gently like ease it into the, like I usually do it in the bottom hole, and then I'll push the top pin through the top area. So here I'm cutting the pin at the top, and after I get the top of the pin out, I put the first part of the hinge into the cabinet, and then I put the top of the last pin through the cabinet. I'll show you in the end. Right there I had the pins in to start the hole. See how I'm pushing it in at the top of the cabinet? Uh-oh, I was trying to show you. You see I was pushing it in from the top, and after I get it in where I want it to be, I cut the tip of the pin out. So yeah, that's how I do it. So I hope you understood how I was explaining that. It was a little bit awkward, but I usually do use the paper clips to start the holes and then come back with the straight pins. Now here you see me marking that bottom lip on the cabinet for the other side. I have already trimmed the top of the first side. So let's go ahead and finish the trim. So now both of the doors are on, and I remember I said that I really didn't like it, that the cabinet looked so plain. So I began to add more layers of the coffee stir sticks. It made the door sturdier, firmer, more rigid, and I just kept playing around with it to determine like how I wanted to decorate it or design the face of the cabinet. And I was going to trim it out to have more or less that shaker type look. And then I decided to do like strips, almost like a beadboard like pattern down the front. And I really liked it. So I just kept going with it. And I decided I definitely needed to make sure that they were straight and I needed to space them out. I did put a bar around the side to line up with that bottom ridge of the cabinet. And I found in my stash, I had a couple drawer pulls. They're actually for windows, but I thought they looked a little bit old-fashioned and they were kind of in a copper tone. So I thought that would look good based on how I was thinking about painting the cabinet. So I began to try to fit them and line them up on the face of the cabinet. Now, okay, I already told you my cuts are rough sometimes. Those were some bigger coffee stir sticks. And so I used a little small piece of a wood block to line it up to make sure my spacing would be correct. And to get the look that I wanted, I only needed 3 of them. So I tried to cut them as close as I could to the space on the cabinet doors and then glue them down. And then I would work on making sure I cleaned up the areas where there were gaps. Now, if you've seen my video for my the beds, because this is a part of my furniture series, I manage my gapping where I fall short on my cuts. I use wood putty to fill those in. So I try to line it up as much as I can and get the cuts as close as I can get them. But yeah, I don't sweat it if I don't quite get it like I'm supposed to. I take care of that with a little bit of wood putty. Now I did put a doorstop there so that when I close my doors, they won't invert. I wanted to make sure they laid flush. So I just added a small piece of wood right there at the top of the door so that when the door is closed, they'll close evenly. So here we go. I said, gaps, what gaps? Yeah, we're going to take care of that. Now you see along the top edges, there are some little spaces. So I just got like a little small spatula I had left over from some kind of face cream or something. And I used that as my little spatula to fill in the gaps. And I probably got out more than I needed. But I just went along anywhere that I saw any little spaces that I didn't like and where I wanted the wood to attach to look like it was one piece or that it had been routed out rather than cut in strips, and just filled it in. And after I filled it, smashed it in a little bit with my hands, I took the sandpaper. I didn't show you all the sanding because as you all know, I really hate sanding. And I would use my toothpick and pick out little clumps to make sure it didn't look glunky. But yeah, just put it in there, and after it dried, I cleaned up around the edges and sanded. And again, this is one of those parts of it you're going to have to take your time. Now, if you can make really great cuts, you can avoid this all together. But yeah, when me and Gretchen, little Gretchen, make furniture, we run into these little problems. But I've figured out a workaround. So this is what I do. And then I looked at the side of my cabinet where I added that little bar. I saw some more gapping, more spaces that I didn't like. So I just went along those edges with my wood putty and smashed it. Now, real cabinet makers and wood makers would probably cringe if they saw me doing something like this. Sorry, this is what I do. But in the end, my cabinet's going to look really, really great. I'm going to sand it smooth. Sorry for the camera shaking. I did show you a little sanding here, but I just wanted to make sure you know you do have to sand it and clean that up. You can't just leave it looking clunky like that. Now that everything's done, I'm just showing you how it looks after it's sanded. That looks good. It doesn't look um, like I've added wood putty, and it's a good quality wood putty, so it looks really good. And I just wanted to work on those legs a little bit more to smooth those out, because you want your surface to be as nice as possible, so when you stain it or paint it, you have a really good, clean, neat surface to work on. Now I'm adding the handles to my doors. Now I do not use pins. I use the Gorilla Gel Super Glue. And that works really well for me. Now you have to be very controlled and very precise where you put it, because you don't want it to ruin your design. So I put it on the tip of a toothpick and then add it to the spot that I want it to be on the handle. And then I carefully use tweezers to line it up where I want it. Now, you need your hand to be steady. You don't need to sneeze or anything, because when you put it down, that gel begins to take. So you have to be very precise where you want it. Now, I'm trying to put it, I'm going to fumble. I had to edit it out because I screamed, because I didn't want it to, when it did that, I just hollered. But I got it lined up where I wanted it. I felt good about it. But yeah, tweezers are your friend when you're working with really teeny pieces and small areas, because sometimes your fingers are just too chunky to get line things up like you want it. So you have to work really quick with this glue, because it begins to catch. And if it catches where you don't want it, yeah, you've got a problem, because it's not going to want to let go. So after that was set, I started to turn my attention toward the drawer. So the cabinets were looking great, and the drawer was looking kind of plain now. I had added a little, sort of like a beveled edge on the side of the drawer to make it fit really nice, but I wasn't satisfied with the overall look of the drawer. So I started to trim a little bit of the bevel down to make it a little bit more flush with the face of the drawer. Now be very careful anytime you're using the blade. That's why Morton blade is very, very sharp. So I was just taking off just very thin shards of the edge of that bevel, just to make it a little bit, like I said, more flush with the face of the drawer. And while I was doing that, I came up with an idea. I decided that I would just add one coffee stir stick to the middle of the drawer. And that's what I did. Just straight across the middle. And just I felt like that just was a nod to what was going on the face of the cabinet door. And after fitting it on there, making sure it was lined up to be in the center, I glued it on. So I was just more or less just looking. The drawers, the handles were dry, the door stopper was dry, so I was just making sure everything closed really neat. You see my trench around the top. Everything is looking good. I was waiting for that drawer to kind of dry a little bit, because I want to add the handle, so I was trying to give it a minute. I probably should have clamped it, and I didn't, so I remembered I should just probably go ahead and clamp it. And just kind of gave it a couple seconds to dry. And here we are, adding the final touch, the finishing piece, the handle to the drawer of the Rooming House Dollhouse Pantry Cabinet. Now, if you've been enjoying my videos, please let me know in the comments. Definitely like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to check out my other videos from my furniture series here on Little Gretchen's Workshop. There's our finished cabinet. It's looking good. It fits perfectly in the pantry. I can't wait to stain it and decorate it. Maybe I'll paint it. I'm going to do a part 2 video for the pantry cabinet, so definitely be looking out for that video. I've enjoyed you dolls so much today. Thank you so much for being with me today on this video, and thank you so much for following along on this journey with me. See you next time on Little Gretchen's Workshop. Bye bye, dolls.